Well, hey guys, it's Krista here from Krista Quilts, back with another fun design to tell you all about it. It's called Circuit Board, which is a really fun kind of geometric modern design that looks great stitched either on a large or a small scale. It's actually one of the designs included in my book, 99 Machine Quilting Designs. So be sure to grab a copy of the PDF so you can follow along. Now for all of my designs, first I like to sketch them out and then stitch them because it really helps me make that mind-body connection so I can really get a feel for how the design is going to flow. If I like the design, I might actually use it on an edge-to-edge over a whole quilt. That's what I did on the quilt behind me, but I'll show you a little bit more about that later on. For now, if you want to get some bonus tips on getting started with free motion quilting, be sure to check out the description box below, and there's links to all the goodies that I talk about too. Now let me show you how this is done so you can have as much fun quilting it as I did. Now let me show you how to draw circuit board, design number 53 from the book. So now I'm going to draw out circuit board, which is one of my favorite geometric designs. Really, whenever I'm coming up with these designs, I just kind of take my pen to paper and I figure out what if I do all straight lines and roughly 90-degree angles? What if I try not to cross over my lines? What kind of shape is this going to turn into? And with any of these all over geometric designs and all over basically meandering designs, I'm trying to fill in all the spaces and I'm trying to keep my lines relatively the same size and the same scale, but I'm not trying to overthink it. I'm just trying to enjoy the flow of the design. If I accidentally do cross over a line, that's not a big deal. And one of the reasons I like to make a quilting plan or sketch out my design before I stitch it on my sample is to kind of work out any of the kinks. Maybe I need to go up and down, maybe I need to go left and right, maybe I need to stitch it out in a certain direction. And so by drawing it out first on pencil and paper or a little drawing pad like I have here, that allows me to kind of warm up and get ready to stitch it out. Now you'll notice as I draw out these designs, I'm not worrying about how many bumps or how many little pieces of the design I'm doing. When I stitch it out, I'm basically going to try to get the same look, but I'm not necessarily going to have it be an exact match. And when I'm doing these designs on paper, I'll just let them go how they want to go. When I'm stitching them out, I'm not going to actually draw any of the design. So drawing it out on paper is simply for me to get warmed up and really get comfortable with the design. Now I'm just going to fill in all of this space and then I will take it to the machine and stitch it out so you can see what it looks like. As I'm quilting circuit board on my practice sample, I'm actually stitching it out at a little bit of a larger scale. And so basically what that means is that I'm taking my design that I had actually drawn out before and I'm stitching something similar, but I'm not trying to replicate the exact design. I'm not stitching the same number of lines that I drew. I'm just kind of getting a rough idea of what it's going to look like so you can tell that it's the same pattern. So quilting it on a larger scale means that my lines are a little bit larger and the space in between them is a little bit wider. And usually I stitch things out on a larger scale if I'm trying to cover more area or I'm trying to quilt a little bit faster. You can also stitch this on a smaller scale, and in order to do that, you would just make your lines closer together, maybe do more turns, and just focus on filling in smaller areas. But any way you stitch it, you just really want to be consistent. You could even make larger and smaller areas of the design, but again, you just want to repeat that kind of on a random but noticeable basis so that it looks like you're intentional while you're stitching. But really, any size that you stitch this design is going to look good. Now, as I stitch from edge to edge, I basically am going to have some mess around the edges, but I'm not worried about that too much because I can just cover that up by binding. And one of the things I always say is when in doubt, add more quilting. If you're not happy with how it's looking, just add more quilting and your eye is not going to see all the individual stitches, it's just going to see the overall texture. This makes a really good design for an edge-to-edge quilt if you want to just have one design over the whole quilt, or you can add it as a background fill, maybe surrounding another larger motif. That kind of works out as well. So a good rule of thumb when you're doing these kinds of designs is to draw it out like I've shown you, practice on a practice sample, and then take it to the real quilt. You can work out how much you want to quilt, how densely, the thread colors, and all those types of things. Now you'll notice when I'm doing these practice samples, I'm using a highly contrasting thread so that you can see what I'm doing, but when I actually quilt this on a real quilt, I would use more of a blending thread, and so that you're not going to see those individual stitches unless I want that to be the star of the show. So you'll notice I'm actually quilting with free motion techniques right now. That means the feed dogs are dropped and I'm using a specialty free motion foot that can stitch lines in any direction. Now I'm not using the built-in stitch regulator on my machine. Instead, I'm regulating the length of the stitches by how fast or slow I move the fabric. Because this is a more linear design, what I will do is I will stop stitching at the corners and sometimes take an extra stitch to make those corners nice and crisp. This design is really great for modern, industrial, edgy looking quilts, and whether I'm stitching this out on a small sample or on a large quilt, I'm really just quilting the area in between my hands. So on the small sample, I don't have to move the quilt very much because it's so small. However, if I were actually doing this on a large quilt, what I would do is I would scrunch up the quilt in the areas outside my hands and then make sure the area in between my hands is flat. So as long as that area in between your hands is flat, you're gonna have a lot more control and the quilt is gonna move much more smoothly. And here's what circuit board looks like when quilted with a darker contrasting thread on light fabric. If you want your stitching to be more subtle, quilt with a blending thread on matching fabric. So that's circuit board. What do you think? Do you think you could see yourself quilting it on a whole quilt? That's what I did on the quilt behind me called Loose Weave. It's actually one of the patterns in another book that I've written called How Do I Quilt It? Check out this close-up detail where you can really see all that interesting texture that really adds depth to the design. And you know what? Because I used soft and breathable materials like cotton fabric, cotton thread, cotton batting, this quilt is really cuddly even though I quilted the heck out of it. So don't be afraid to quilt your quilts densely. The more you love them, the more you use them, the more you wash them, they're just going to cuddle up and be so fun to use. Until next time, happy quilting!